Tonight's study is going to be on the book of Joshua. Just a reminder, if you have questions, the Q&A panel is at the bottom. If you want to put your hand up and share something, again, that's fine as well. And we're going to be looking at the book of Joshua, which is, we finished the Pentateuch, finished the Torah last week. And so this week we have Joshua, Judges, and Ruth. Tonight is Joshua. On Wednesday night at 8 o'clock, it's going to be Judges. And then I know people like to be out for the clap of the NHS on Thursday is Ruth, but we'll be rolling from just after 8 with that. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Edith, for joining us as well. Joshua is the first book in the second section of the Bible, and that's what we're going to be looking at in this Open the Book Bible study tonight. And in the Hebrew canon, it's referred to as the prophets, and in the Greek, it's referred to as the start of the historical books. The prophets were subdivided into two. You had the former prophets and the latter prophets. The former prophets comprise of 4 books, and that is Joshua, Judges, Samuel's, and Kings. And the reason I say Samuel and Kings is that they weren't split originally. And the latter prophets also comprises of 4 books: Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and the 12. So the historical books, this is what they were comprised of. 12 books in total, Joshua to Esther, and they cover approximately 1,000 years of history. We see in this period of history 3 great phases. 1, Moses to Samuel. Secondly, Samuel to the division of the kingdom into Judea and Israel. And thirdly, the division of the kingdom up into Malachi, okay? And it's important in this introduction that we remember that the Pentateuch is the foundation, the Torah is the foundation, the historical section is the building, founded upon the principles laid down in the Pentateuch. Indeed, all of those principles are illustrated positively or negatively in this next section as we work our way through it. There is, of course, also much history in the Pentateuch, and we must not take the title historical books as if this is the only history in the Old Testament, because you know full well that's not the case. It is somewhat a loose title, and in many ways the Hebrew reference they use of it being the prophets, that title comes much nearer to the heart of the matter. It is not the history as we know generally. For instance, much is excluded, and much included according to the aim. Once again, as we said in one of the earlier sessions, the aim governs the scope. And that's important, okay? So the aim governs the scope. So what is in fact history, but is history prophetically interpreted? That's important. It's a history, if you like, from God's perspective, from God's standpoint, as in how it affects and realizes divine ends. And finally, it's worth noting that the connection between the Pentateuch and Joshua in particular is particularly strong. Okay, with that, we're going to look at the authorship and date as well. And the authorship and date is important as well. And it's one of those aspects, for those that have joined us for the first time, we look at the introduction, the authorship and date, key to the book, outline of the book, and message of the book, and then have a series of questions you can look at. For Mr. and Mrs. Kite, the materials or the previous sessions that we've done can all be found on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Hatikva Films. And if you go there and subscribe, you'll be notified when these programs are going live. So please do take a moment there, go subscribe, encourage us in that, and you can do a high five with a thumbs up as well if you're enjoying these sessions. So authorship and date. It would seem in many parts of the book that Joshua was written by an eyewitness or by someone living near to that time. And we see often in the book of Joshua, we, us, etc., and unto this day. So turn with me, if you've got your Bibles, to show you a couple of illustrations of that. In Joshua 4 verse 9 is the first one we will look at. Joshua 4 verse 9. And again, we're going to flick through quite a few. Get your thumb in Joshua and we will bounce around it quite a bit. Joshua 4 verse 9 says this: And Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of the Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priests that bore the ark of the covenant stood, and they are there unto this day. Gives us a time scale. That's kind of part of what was involved. And then Joshua 5 verse 1, it came to pass when all the kings of the Amorites that were beyond the Jordan westward, and all the kings of the Canaanites that were by the sea, heard how that the Lord had dried up the waters of the Jordan from before the children of Israel, until we were passed over, that their heart melted, neither was there spirit in them anymore, because of the children of Israel. So note the word we there. And then again in Joshua 6 verse 9, and the armed men went before the priests that blew the trumpets, and the rearward went after the ark, the priests blowing the trumpets as they went. Okay, so there's they involved there. And then 6 verse 25 says this, but Rahab the harlot and her father's household and all that she had did Joshua save alive, and she dwelt in the midst of Israel unto this day, because she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. Unto this day. Why would they use that term if it wasn't in the time period that they were engaged with her? Joshua 7 verse 26 again, and they raised over him a great heap of stones unto this day, and the Lord turned from the fierceness of his anger, wherefore the name of that place was called the Valley of Achor, or Achor, unto this day. Okay, unto this day again. And then chapter 8 verse 28, chapter 8 verse 28, we have this. So Joshua burned Ai and made it a heap forever, even a desolation unto this day. And the king of Ai, he hanged on a tree until the eventide. At the going down of the sun, Joshua commanded, and they took his body down from the tree and cast it at the entrance of the gate of the city, and raised thereon a great heap of stones unto this day. And so it's quite again, unto this day is repeated over and over again. Again, in Joshua 9 verse 27, and Joshua made them that day hewers of wood and drawers of water for the congregation, for the altar of the Lord, unto this day, in the place which he should choose. And then the next chapter, chapter 10 verse 27, do you see how relevant this is to the timing and the authorship? And it came to pass at the time of the going down of the sun that Joshua commanded, and they took them down off the trees and cast them into the cave wherein they had hidden themselves, and laid great stones on the mouth of the cave unto this very day. And then one more, Joshua 15 verse 63. 15 verse 63. And as for the Jebusites, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the children of Judah, could not drive them out, but the Jebusites dwell with the children of Judah at Jerusalem unto this day. Okay, so we see that it appears that there was an eyewitness or someone living near to the time that would have collated and brought the book of Joshua together. The Talmud actually asserts that Joshua was the author of Deuteronomy. And so turn back with me to Deuteronomy 34. Deuteronomy 34, verse 5 to 12. Okay, last few verses. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. And he buried him in the valley in the land of Moab, over against Beth Peor. But no man knows of his sepulchre until this day. And Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eye was not dim, nor his natural force abated. And the children of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. So the days of weeping in the mourning for Moses were ended. And Joshua, the son of Nun, was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands upon him. And the children of Israel listened unto him and did as the Lord commanded Moses. And there has not arisen a prophet since in Israel, like unto Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, in all the signs and the wonders which the Lord sent him to do in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his servants and to all his land, and in all the mighty hand and in all the great terror which Moses wrought in the sight of all Israel. So it's the Talmud instructs us that Joshua was the author of Deuteronomy, as well as the book of Joshua. This one piece of internal evidence that we have in the book of Judges that would give us book of Joshua that would give us an indication of that is Joshua 24, verse 26, right at the end of the book of Joshua. It says, and Joshua, this is Joshua 4:26, and Joshua wrote these words in the book of the law of God, and he took a great stone and set it up there under the oak that was by the sanctuary of the Lord. So Joshua wrote these words in the book of the law of God. While Jewish tradition therefore accepts the authorship of Joshua himself with additions and editing by later scribes, some scholars think that Joshua in its present form was the work of Samuel. Whoever it was, the main body of the book must have been written very shortly after the main events described, if not during them. It appears, therefore, that there is much to support the view that if Joshua did not write this book, he certainly supplied the material for it. The book covers a period of 25 years and can be dated approximately 1400 BC, although there is controversy over this date. And if you want to look at some and examine some of that controversy, then I heartily recommend to you, if you haven't got it yet, Patterns of Evidence, Exodus, because this looks at a wall of time and looks at this time period and the Exodus from Egypt and how important that is. The follow-on from that is also a great film called Moses Controversy, and this looks at who wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, the Moses Controversy, both by the same author, a good friend of mine, Tim Mahoney, who's the producer on those fantastic documentaries looking at the evidence for the Exodus and whether Moses wrote the Torah. And finally, and this one is out and available to be delivered from, actually the first batch went out today. The Red Sea Miracle is, again, absolutely superb. This one is just part 1, part 2 comes out later in the year, but I highly recommend these 3 films to you. They've got a very high production value and they're very, very scholarly, but done in a brilliant way. So that really will unpack things for you if you're interested in this time period in particular. And there'll be more looking at Joshua down the road, but they do cover. There's also a series for children as well. And so 25 years approximately, around 1400 BC, the man Joshua was an Ephraimite. Turn with me to 1 Chronicles 7 verse 27, okay? 1 Chronicles 7 verse 27 gives us that indication of that. 1 Chronicles 7:27. Just a second. 1 Chronicles 7:27. Nun his son, Joshua his son. So it's looking at the time, and the verse 20 says, and the sons of Ephraim, and it gives the whole list, and then the last one of those was Joshua his son, who was the son of Nun, okay, of the Ephraim grouping. His original name was Hoshea or Hoshua, which is or Yehoshua, which is Jesus, the Lord is salvation, and he led the army against Amalek. Turn with me to Exodus 17 verse 10 to see that to be evidenced. Exodus 17 verse 10. So Exodus 17 verse 10 says this. So Joshua did as Moses had said to him and fought with Amalek, and Moses and Aaron and Hur went up to the top of the hill. So he was involved in the battle against the Amalekites and was Moses's personal attendant. And that's evidenced in Exodus 24 verse 13. Exodus 24 verse 13. You could say, if you like, he was a steward of Moses. Exodus 24 verse 13. And Moses rose up, and Joshua his minister, and Moses went up into the mountain of God. And then again in Exodus 33 verse 11, Exodus 33 verse 11 says this. And the Lord spoke to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his friend, and he turned again into the camp. But his minister, Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, did not depart out of the tent. So he's identified here as Moses is, as Moshe's personal assistant. He was one of the 12 spies also, and that's, you're probably familiar with that, but just to give the evidence for that, Numbers 14, verse 6 to 9, we know he was one of the 2 spies that wasn't fearful of it. So Numbers 14, verse 6 to 9. And Joshua, the son of Nun, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, who were of them that spied out the land, rent their clothes, and they spoke unto all the congregation of the children of Israel. saying, "The land which we passed through to spy it out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, then he'll bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only rebel not against the Lord, neither fear you the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their defense is removed from over them, and the Lord is with us. Fear them not." And then he says again in verse 30 and 38 of the same chapter, "Surely you shall not come into the land concerning which I swore that I would make you dwell therein, except for Caleb the son of Jephunneh and Joshua the son of Nun." And then verse 38 repeats it, "But Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh remained alive of those men that went to spy out the land." You see, there was an opportunity for all of them to inherit it, but it's only those that saw the need to possess the land and understood that the Lord was with them that actually did inherit it. Josephus says that Joshua was 85 years of age when he succeeded Moses, and we know that he died at the age of 110 years old because Joshua 24:29 tells us that. Joshua 24:29. "And it came to pass after these things that Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died, being 110 years old. His name appears in the Tel El Amarna tablets in 614 BC. He has been favorably compared with the greatest military commanders of history." And so we know that it was about, as I've mentioned, 85 years of age when he succeeded, died at 110 years. So 25 years, we have all of this life story, if you like, summed up in the book of Joshua. So what's the key to the book? Well, it's very simple. The key is undoubtedly the word inherit or inheritance. It's used approximately 58 times in Joshua, and we find ourselves having moved away from redemption and God's dwelling place into our inheritance. Although all of these are intimately and progressively linked together, everywhere we turn in the book of Joshua, we are led to the matter of inheritance. Therefore, we ought to note that the word possess is frequently used as well. Our inheritance has to be possessed. Another factor we ought to note is that there is a very big element of conflict associated with possessing. Indeed, inheriting is always linked in the Bible with overcoming. This is Joshua. Salvation is of the Lord. It's all about overcoming. Okay, and now we're going to look at the outline of the book, and again, it's a threefold division that I'll come on to in just a second. The importance of men in God's economy as we look at the outline of the book is vital to us, though, because if we look at it, you've got Moses, you've got Abraham. God's work is supremely men. He's not interested in one sense in things, but in people. We see this in the man of Joshua. This book, dealing with one of the great moves forward in God's plan, begins with Joshua's call and commission and ends with his home call. We must never lose sight of this tremendous truth. So very early on, of course, we'll see in Joshua 1 in just a moment, we'll unpack that in a second. There are it's really a threefold division throughout the book. You've got the conquest of the land, which is Joshua 1 to Joshua 12. You've got the division of the inheritance, which is Joshua 13 to Joshua 22. And then you've got the farewell of Joshua, which is Joshua 23 and 24. And as is customary, I'm going to share the screen and we're going to go through some of these points together. Just bear with me 1 second and we'll share the screen for you all. I hope and trust you can all see this. Just a second. Move this over. Okay, so the book of Joshua. Okay, introduction, authorship date, key to the book, and we're on the outline of the book. Okay, so the conquest of the land is what we're going to look at first here. Conquest of the land. And there is a need to possess. This is the preparation. This is what we all have. There's a preparation in every area of our lives as we move forward with him. He prepares us for what is around the corner. And Joshua 1 verse 3, 5, 6, and 11, and really want to focus on these because there is something that's been given and something that's been provided, but it must be possessed. I can give you a car, I can give you a gift, I can give you a present, but unless you open that present and use it, it's worthless. And so Joshua 1 verse 3. Every place that the sole of your foot shall tread upon, to you have I given it, as I spoke unto Moses. And then verse 5. There shall not any man be able to stand before you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not fail you nor forsake you. And then verse 6, be strong and of good courage, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land which I swore unto their fathers to give them. And then verse 11, pass through the middle of the camp and command the people, saying, prepare you victuals, for within 3 days you are to pass over this Jordan to go in to possess the land which the Lord your God gives you to possess it. So we have this provision, we have this expectation, but there is a role and a responsibility for us to possess and take hold of it. There's the need to count the cost. Chapter 2, the spies had to face the realities in faith. And let's, if we can notice the parallels with Calvary as well, you've got 3 days appearing. So in Joshua 1:11, it says you'll pass over within 3 days. And then Joshua 2 verse 16 says, and she said unto them, get you to the mountain, lest the pursuers light upon you, and hide yourselves there 3 days until the pursuers be returned, and afterwards may you go your way. And again in chapter 3, verse 2, it came to pass after 3 days that the officers went through the midst of the camp. So this constant tie from the book of Joshua, the book of Yeshua, the book of to the work of Calvary and the timing of Calvary as well. There is a cost to overcoming. Our Savior has paid it, but we must also lay down our lives. Let him deny himself, take up his cross and follow me. He that loves his life or loses his life for my sake shall find it, And there is also the need of faith and obedience. Note that Jordan was in full harvest flood tide, and naturally it was impossible to pass. Rahab, of course, was also a most remarkable example of this. She possessed because of her obedience and of her willingness to hide the testimony, if you like. Then we have the fundamental need of the cross, which is found in chapter 3 to chapter 5. Jordan and the Red Sea, Christ's death for us. The Red Sea, of course, being Christ's death for us, and our death as Christ, if you like, is the Jordan. And then you have the memorial stones. I just want to focus on this for a minute because it's fascinating, isn't it? Here we have the sea is parted for the Israelites going that way. The sea's parted the other way for Elijah and Elisha. Later on in the Bible. But when Jesus steps into the sea, into the Jordan, it doesn't part. Why? What is it? This is the King of Kings who walked on water. Why did the Jordan not part? Surely it would have bowed. Here we have the Israelites that passed through the Red Sea. We have them passing over the Jordan, and yet when Jesus enters it doesn't happen. You'd have thought, him being King of Kings, that it would, but what is it pointing to? Well, that middle ground. And then we have these 12 stones, 12 buried in the river. Now, that wasn't something that was instructed of by God. It was something that Joshua did. 12 memorial stones buried in a river, hidden. Why? Why? Why would you set up a memorial that's hidden? Unless that in type is a picture of, bearing in mind the sea is often a picture of nations, is actually there is a need for a witness in the waters of this world, shall we say, to help people get from the wilderness into the promised land. And so turn with me to chapter 3, verse 16. It says that the waters which came down from above stood and rose up in one great heap, a great way off at Adam, and the city that is beside Zarethan, and those that went down towards the sea of the Arabah, even the salt sea, were wholly cut off, and the people passed over right against Jericho. Now the water was cut off at Adam. Interesting, right? The old Adam was crucified with Christ. And you have Jesus entering into the Jordan. He became the mediator from the wilderness into the promised land. He entered in, and the role and responsibility of the 12 stones in the water is exactly the same process. It's another picture of circumcision. And then we have Gilgal, the rolling and the wheel, and that's in Joshua 5, verse 9. It says here, and the Lord said unto Joshua, this day have I rolled away the reproach of Egypt from off of you. Wherefore the name of that place was called Gilgal unto this day. The rolling, cast your burdens upon him, for he cares for you. Our sin has been rolled onto him. Of course, the rolling away of the stone, which is a glorious picture. And every element of this ties back in to the Passover as well, which of course was celebrated last week. And then we have finally the need of leadership of Christ by the Holy Spirit. And read with me Joshua 5, verse 13 to 15. It came to pass when Joshua was by Jericho that he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, there stood a man over against him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went unto him and said unto him, are you for us or for our adversaries? And he said, neither. But as prince of the host of the Lord am I now come. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and did worship, and said unto him, what says my Lord unto his servant? And the prince of the Lord's host, said unto Joshua, put off your shoes from off your feet, for the place whereon you stand is holy. And Joshua did immediately. And so we have Joshua here. Jesus is a type of Christ, and the captain of the Lord of hosts is a type of the Holy Spirit. And note also within there that the ark is there as well. The ark is there. It's that process of being in a position that where the house of God is, where the dwelling place of God, there is no other way of knowing the lordship of Christ but by the Spirit. And of course, he took off his shoes, a symbol of that reality. So that's the first 5 chapters, the conquest of the land, brief overview. And then we have the possession of the land, chapter 6 to chapter 12. And this is, again, there's so much that we could unpack, but this is meant to just be an overview. So you've got Joshua has been called in the past a brilliant general. The land was divided into quite a number of petty kingdoms, not at all united except against common invasion. And Joshua didn't do what, the traditional thought process would be. He didn't attack the south because it was well fortified. He didn't attack from the north because this would have united all of these enclaves, all of these kingdoms against him. He attacked directly across the Jordan when it was in harvest flood tide, which split the country in two. And Jericho and Ai were absolutely essential to victory as the dominated the passes into the land. So this was really a central campaign in order to split the enemy in one sense. Quite an amazing strategy if you think about it. So the central campaign, chapter 6 to 8, you have the timing, the perseverance, faith, praise, and the soles of their feet. And that's quite time doesn't permit us to go into that in great detail, but it's quite profound in how Jericho was compassed, how Jericho was destroyed, and the ramifications of that in the process. And Joshua, it's indicated in the very last verse that the Lord was with Joshua and his fame was in all of the land just because of that one battle. Then we have Achan's sin in chapter 7. Note, there were things taken, things stolen, deceitfully hidden, and it had to be judged and put away. Then Ai, chapter 8, verse 1 to 29, we have sin again having to be dealt with before victory. All the people had to be involved, and that's still true in this day and age. We almost live in a period where actually if we don't deal with sin, and we've all personally had to do that, deal with sin on recent basis, but in order to see the victory in our lives, we need to have the sin truly dealt with. And that's really, there's a lot of if I could tie it back into 2 Chronicles 7 verse 13 and 14, the Lord is looking for the church to deal with its internal sin before the nation can be reached. And then we have the altar built in chapter 8 verse 30 to 35. Let's read that. Chapter 8 verse 30 to 35. Then Joshua built an altar unto the Lord, the God of Israel, in Mount Ebal, as Moses the servant of the Lord commanded the children of Israel, as it is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of unhewn stones upon which no man had lifted up any iron, and they offered thereon burnt offerings unto the Lord and sacrificed peace offerings. And he wrote there upon the stones a copy of the law of Moses, which he wrote in the presence of the children of Israel. And all Israel and all their elders and officers and their judges stood on this side of the ark, and on that side before the priests, the Levites that bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord, as well the sojourner as the homeborn, half of them in the front of Mount Gerizim, and half of them in front of Mount Ebal, as Moses the servant of the Lord had commanded at the first, that they should bless the people of Israel. And afterward he read all the words of the law, the blessing and the curse, according to all that is written in the book of the law. There was not a word of all that Moses commanded which Joshua read not before all the assembly of Israel, and the women and the little ones and the sojourners that were among them. And that's quite a feat. It was pointing again, this altar, Christ's work on the cross being the basis for all overcoming, for the whole of Israel, and of course an application for us today. And then you have the southern campaign in chapters 9 and 10. You have the alliance of the Canaanite tribes in chapter 9, verse 1 and 2. And I'll just read that to you. It came to pass when all the kings that would be on the Jordan, in the hill country and in the lowland, and on all the shore of the great sea in front of Lebanon, the Hittite and the Amorite, the Canaanite, the Perizzite and the Hivite, and the Jebusite heard thereof, that they gathered themselves together to fight with Joshua and with Israel with one accord. You see, the enemy often tries to gather the troops together when it's under threat. The alliance of evil was directed against the people of God, possessing their possessions. And then we have in chapter 9, verse 3 to 27, the cleverness of the Gibeonites. Sometimes satanic devices affect the matter of overcoming. And once confessed, God turned the tables on Satan. Then we have in chapter 10, the defeat of the 5 kings. And it's important to note again the need of executive action, the feet on their necks, as is described there. And then you have the conquest of the rest of the south in chapter 10, verse 29 to 43. I hope I'm not going too fast for you, but we want to give you something that you can chew on and feed on over the next season. The northern campaign, chapter 11, all was taken by faith. And note what Joshua did not overcome. Joshua 11, verse 13 and verse 22. Let's look there together. Joshua 11, verse 13. But as for the cities that stood on their mounds, Israel burned none of them, save Hazor only, that did Joshua burn. And then and all the spoil of these cities and the cattle the children of Israel took for a prey unto themselves, but every man they smote with the edge of the sword until they had destroyed them, neither left they any that breathed. And then in verse 22, there was none of the Anakim left in the land of the children of Israel, only in Gaza, in Gat, and in Ashdod did some remain. Now, there's something very interesting there, isn't there? What happened in Gaza, Gat, Ash? They were instructed to obviously deal with all of these, and they didn't. And who came out of that territory? Goliath, and the battles, and many lives were lost as a result of that later on historically. And so this is something that's important. We need to rout the enemy where God tells us to deal with that. And then chapter 12 is a summary of the whole of that possession of the land period. Okay, let's move on together. Then we have the division of the inheritance, which is chapter 13 to 22. And you've got the introduction and the 2.5 tribes inheritance, chapter 13. Judah's inheritance, chapter 14 and 15. And note within that, you've got Caleb's inheritance. He has Hebron, which is chapter 14, verse 1 to 15. And the part played by Othniel. Turn with me there to Joshua 15, verse 13 to 19. Joshua 15, 13 to 19. And unto Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, he gave a portion among the children of Judah, according to the commandment of the Lord to Joshua, even Kiriath Arba, which was the father of Anak, the same as Hebron. And Caleb drove out there the 3 sons of Anak, Shishai and Ahiman and Talmai, the children of Anak. And he went up there against the inhabitants of Devir. Now the name of Devir before time was Kiriath Sefer. And Caleb said, he that smites Kiriath Sefer and takes it to him, will I give Achsah, my daughter, to wife. And Othniel, the son of Kenaz, the brother of Caleb, took it, and he gave him Achsah, his daughter, to wife. And it came to pass, when she came unto him, that she moved him to ask of her father a field. And she alighted from off of her ass, off of her donkey. And Caleb said, what would you thou? And she said, give me a blessing, for that you have sent me in the land of the south. Give me also springs of water. And he gave her the upper springs and the nether springs. So the lady's involvement again got a greater inheritance as a result. And have a look at that, see what the Lord shows you in that passage and in that picture, that Othniel had a part to play in that process. Then you have the 7 remaining tribes in Joshua 18:19, and again, look how faithfully the chronicler mentions whether they fully drove out the enemy or not. So this is important because it's all to do with the tying of the inheritance. So we have chapter 15, verse 63. And as for the Jebusites, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the children of Judah could not drive them out, but the Jebusites dwell with the children of Judah at Jerusalem to this day. And then chapter 16, verse 10. And they drove not out the Canaanites that dwelt in Gaza, but the Canaanites dwell in the midst of Ephraim unto this day, and have become servants to do task work. And then chapter 17, verse 12 and 13. Yet the children of Manasseh could not drive out the inhabitants of those cities, but the Canaanites would dwell in that land. It came to pass, when the children of Israel were waxed strong, that they put the Canaanites to task work and did not utterly drive them out. And then in verse 18 of that same passage, but the hill country shall be yours, for though it is a forest, you shall cut it down, and the goings out thereof shall be yours. For you shall drive out the Canaanites, though they have chariots of iron, and though they are strong. So there is a responsibility, and it's interesting that these are, if you think about it, why would the Lord include whether they fully drove out the enemy, unless it's to just do and tie back with the key of the book and understanding our inheritance on, I need to take a stand for our inheritance to be accomplished. And then in chapters 20 to 21, we have the refuge cities and the Levitical cities. So 3 parts to that: cities of refuge, chapter 20, Levitical cities, chapter 21, and there was 48 cities in all, including 6 cities of refuge and 13 priestly cities, and the Levites portion throughout this book. Turn me to chapter 13, verse 14, because they have a special place, as we know. So Leviticus 13:14. Only unto the tribe of Levi he gave no inheritance. The offerings of the Lord, the God of Israel, made by fire, are his inheritance, and he spoke unto them. And in verse 33, but unto the tribe of Levi Moses gave no inheritance. The Lord, the God of Israel, is their inheritance, as he spoke unto them. And then chapter 14, verse 3 and 4. For Moses had given the inheritance to the 2 tribes and the half tribe beyond the Jordan, but unto the Levites he gave no inheritance among them. For the children of Joseph were 2 tribes, Manasseh and Ephraim, and they gave no portion unto the Levites in the land, save cities to dwell in, with the suburbs thereof for their cattle and their substance. And then chapter 18 and verse 7. For the Levites have no portion among you, for the priesthood of the Lord is their inheritance. And Gad and Reuben and the half tribe of Manasseh have received their inheritance beyond the Jordan eastward, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave them. You see, the Levites' portion of being God's inheritance, what a privileged position that was, that actually the land and owning of land and inheritance in physical property actually paled into insignificance compared to the inheritance being associated with the Lord. And then in chapter 22, we have a warning to the 2.5 tribes. And it's interesting, of course, they settled on the other side of Jordan. Their position was on the fringe. This is always dangerous, still to this day. When believers live on the fringe, when they're not fully engaged, not fully involved, that's where it's dangerous. And how I know from personal experience that actually, if you get cold, if you move away from the nucleus and move away from things, it is a dangerous position to be in. You are susceptible to the work of the enemy, susceptible to be dragging off, and it's the mercy of God that draws us back. But don't settle for less than what the Lord wants you to have. Don't settle for where you are currently being the completeness of what the Lord has and wants for you. And then the altar, of course, is found in there as well. Christ crucified, our oneness, our unifying bond. So we've got to always look and partake and take hold of the inheritance. We have to remember that there's a whole generation that died in the wilderness because they didn't partake of their inheritance, even though they saw the miracles, even though they saw the provision, even though they saw the works of God, even though God was dwelling in the midst of them, they still didn't believe that he could carry out his mission and his plan to give them the land of Canaan, the allotment of their inheritance. What a tragedy. And are we living in a generation that actually haven't taken hold of the inheritance that God has afforded to us? And then we have in chapter 23 and 24, the farewell. Chapter 23 and 24, the farewell of Joshua. And 23 verse 1 to 24 verse 15 looks at that farewell. And then 24 verse 16 to 28 is the renewal of the covenant, followed by the death of Joshua in 24, 29 to 31. And then the burial of Joseph's bones and Eleazar, Aaron's son, is chapter 24, verse 29 to 33. And so let's, as I stop the screen share for a moment, let's just have a look just bear with me 1 second. We have the message of the book. And so the message of the book is really a summary of what we've looked at. In many vital ways, Joshua is the consummation of Exodus. Our redemption has two sides: out of, into. Out of, into. So Exodus 6, verse 6 to 8. Tell me there. Exodus 6, 6 to 8, as we look at this, as we begin to draw this time to a close. I don't like to take too long. I want to ensure that people can get through and chew on these things. Exodus 6, 6 to 8. Wherefore say unto the children of Israel, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will rid you out of their bondage, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments, and I will take you to me for a people, and I will be to you a God. And you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who brings you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will bring you in unto the land which I swore to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, and I will give it you for a heritage. I am the Lord. And so we see here this taking out of Egypt, and that's the story of redemption for each and every one of us. We've been taken out of Egypt, and we've been brought into the promised land. The believer is brought out of Egypt by faith in the blood of the Lamb, and he is brought into the promised land by the power of the Holy Spirit. The finished work of Christ is sufficient to bring us out of one world or realm and into the new. Nevertheless, to possess what God has so freely given us, we need to know the cross and the Spirit in our experience. Moses, my servant, is dead. The law can never bring us into the fullness of Christ. But in the book of Joshua, we are shown the principles by which the spiritual inheritance is possessed. Note then the following principles. 1, our inheritance will not just come to us, it must be possessed by faith and obedience. 2, we can settle at any given point, and that will be the measure of our inheriting. 3, conflict is involved not only in the possessing of our inheritance, but in a heavenly position as well. And 3 things that are essential. 1, an absolute utterness. 2, or a commitment, full and complete desire. 2, a deep working of the cross. And 3, the headship of Christ. The headship of the Holy Spirit involved in that process as well. The Lord alone is able to cause us to inherit. His word is continually, I will not fail you, nor forsake you. Be strong and of good courage. Be not afraid, neither be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wheresoever you go. And that's found, of course, in Joshua 1 verse 5. Let me read you there as we come to a close. Joshua 1 verse 5. There shall not any man be able to stand before you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not fail you nor forsake you. And then Joshua 6 verse 9 reiterates a slightly different aspect of that. And the armed men went before the priests that blew the trumpets, and the rear went up the ark, the priests blowing the trumpets as they went. Let me just see where we're at. It's 5 verse 9, I think. Yeah. And we have this process where we're able to possess and dwell the land. I think that's, it's verse 9 of chapter 1 as well. Let me read chapter 6. I've just run chapter 1 verse 6. Be strong and of good courage, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land which I swore to your fathers to give them. And then verse 9 of chapter 1. Have not I commanded you? Be strong and of good courage. Don't be afraid nor be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. We are well able to possess our inheritance because the Lord is with us. It's a reality, and it's only our lack of faith, shall we say, or lack of eyes of seeing the reality of who God really is that can hinder us from fully inheriting what the Lord has for us. May we be granted the eyes to see and the ears to hear what glorious things he's prepared for those who love him, to those who are called according to his purpose. Now, a number of books that Lance Lambert recommended with regard to looking at Joshua in particular. There's a book called Joshua Judges by John Garstang. Gleanings in Joshua by A.W. Pink is another one. Joshua and the Land of Promise by F.B. Meyer. Now, I highly recommend for character studies. I've got most of them. Joshua, the F.B. Meyer books are absolutely fantastic. He was a minister in Leicester for a season, but looking at them, there's some jewels in those books. And Israel and Canaan under Joshua and Judges. And then finally, as we like to do each time, and if you've got any questions, then please pop them in the chat. We are going to share screen again, and I'm going to give you some of the questions for your own personal study. Book of Joshua questions. What are the key words in the book of Joshua? Describe 3 outstanding miracles recorded in Joshua, and what spiritual application can you find for the Christian life today? Give the names of 2 outstanding examples of faith in Joshua apart from Joshua himself. And there's some quite obvious ones and some not so obvious ones. Give 2 examples of warnings given to us in Joshua. What is the greatest warning given to us in chapter 9? And why is there so much mention of conflict in the book? And then we have 6 more for you. Give examples of absolute oneness, absolute utterness found in these chapters 8, verse chapter 10, and verse 14, verse 22, and verse 24 as well. What is so special about the Levites' inheritance? What examples of the cross can you find in chapters 3 to 5? And there's a lot. Read chapters 23 and 24 and state briefly what you learn about the faithfulness and power of God from these chapters. And what do you learn about the attitude of the 2.5 tribes to the eternal purpose of God in their choice of an inheritance? And that can be found in chapter 13, verse 8 to 32, and Numbers 32. And what have you learned about the Holy Spirit from the book of Joshua? And then we're going to be looking on Wednesday at the book of Judges. If you have time between now and then to read through the book of Judges, it will just help with the overview. And then Ruth on Thursday, 23rd of April. We do tend to start just a couple of minutes after 8, so people can do the clap for the NHS out at the front of their houses. And we want to thank you for the privilege of being able to share the book. Thank you for taking the time to come and look at the word together. I really do appreciate it.